My name is Blair. I am 28 years old. Right now, in this very second, I am sitting in the middle of a massive, echoing auditorium in downtown Chicago. In exactly 10 minutes, I will officially be a doctor. The air in this room is completely electric. It is loud, it is chaotic, and it is overwhelmingly joyful. All around me, there are 10,000 people packed into the stadium seating. The noise is a deafening mix of parents cheering, siblings shouting out names, and the constant flashing of cameras capturing one of the most important milestones in a person's life. I am surrounded by a sea of proud families holding giant bouquets of colorful flowers, waving hand-painted signs with glittery letters, and wiping away tears of sheer pride. The energy is so thick you could cut it with a knife. People are hugging their loved ones so tightly, celebrating the end of a grueling, agonizingly long journey through medical school. But as I sit here, drowning in my heavy, suffocating velvet regalia, I feel entirely disconnected from the celebration happening around me. My eyes are fixed on the very front row of the auditorium. Right at the edge of the stage, there is a designated VIP section. These seats were specially reserved for the families of the top graduating students, the ones who earned the highest honors in the class. I earned 4 of those VIP tickets. I earned them through blood, sweat, and completely sleepless nights. I looked down at those 4 premium seats, with their plush red fabric and the little reserved name tags draped over the backrests. All 4 of those seats are completely, entirely empty. There is nobody sitting there. No one is holding a bouquet for me. No one is pointing a camera in my direction. The physical emptiness of those 4 chairs is a stark, violently loud contrast to the joyous chaos exploding everywhere else in the room. It is a very specific type of quiet that settles over you when you realize that the people who are supposed to be your biggest cheerleaders simply did not care enough to show up. I had anticipated this, of course. Deep down in my gut, I knew they would find a way to let me down. They always do. But seeing the actual, physical void where my family should be sitting still manages to twist the knife in my chest. It is not just that they missed it because of a cancelled flight, a terrible snowstorm, or a sudden medical emergency. No, their absence is a deliberate, calculated choice. They chose not to be here. As I sit there, letting the cold reality wash over me, the noise of the auditorium seems to fade into a dull hum. I am surrounded by thousands of people, yet I have never felt more isolated in my entire 28 years of existence. I take a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I tell myself that I did not survive the last decade of absolute hell just to break down crying in front of my graduating class. I straighten my back and adjust the heavy hood around my neck. I am a survivor. But just as I manage to find a sliver of composure, I feel a sudden, sharp buzz vibrating against my leg. My cell phone is tucked away in the hidden pocket of my graduation gown. I already know who it is. I do not want to look, but a morbid sense of curiosity forces my hand to reach into the pocket and pull the phone out. I pull the phone from my pocket and glance at the bright screen. It is a text message from my mother, Sylvia. I stare at her name for a moment, my thumb hovering over the glass. Part of me hopes, in some pathetic, childish way, that maybe it is a heartfelt apology. Maybe it is a message saying they are so incredibly sorry they could not make it, and that they are bursting with pride. But I know better. I swipe open the notification. The message is not long, but every single word is meticulously crafted to inflict the maximum amount of emotional damage. My mother writes to inform me that she, my father Richard, and my 25-year-old younger sister Peyton are currently lounging in a luxury cabana by a massive, sparkling pool in Las Vegas. She actually attached a photo. There they are, wearing expensive sunglasses, holding tall, colorful drinks with little paper umbrellas in them. The caption explains that they flew out to Nevada to celebrate Peyton's massive influencer milestone because she just hit 50,000 followers on her lifestyle social media page. My sister posts pictures of herself trying on clothes, and apparently, that is a monumental achievement worthy of an all-expenses-paid vacation to Sin City. My graduation from one of the most rigorous medical programs in the country, however, did not even warrant a local flight. I read the rest of the text message. My mother's words are dripping with passive-aggressive venom. She types, quote, "Do not be so dramatic about us missing the ceremony today. We are drinking margaritas and having a lovely time. Besides, it is not like you are really a doctor yet anyway. You are just a glorified student until you finish your residency. Have fun in Chicago." Unquote. A glorified student. That is what she called me. After thousands of hours of studying, treating patients, pulling consecutive night shifts, and sacrificing my youth, I am just a glorified student in her eyes. I stare at the glowing letters on my screen until my vision starts to blur. I do not cry. I am way past the point of crying. Instead, a wave of profound, freezing numbness washes over my entire body. My heart stops racing and settles into a slow, heavy rhythm. The last remaining thread of hope I had been holding on to regarding my family just snaps, quietly and permanently. I lock the screen of my phone and slide it back into the dark pocket of my velvet gown. I do not type a reply. There is absolutely nothing left to say. Right at that very moment, a loud, booming voice echoes through the stadium speakers, snapping my attention back to the stage. Dr. Margaret Thorne is stepping up to the podium. Dr. Thorne is the chief of surgery at our affiliated hospital. She is a legend. She is terrifying, brilliant, and arguably the most powerful woman I have ever met. She is also my mentor, the woman who practically dragged me through the darkest days of my medical training. The crowd immediately quiets down out of sheer respect as she adjusts the microphone. She looks out over the sea of graduates, and for a brief, fleeting second, her sharp eyes lock directly onto mine. She sees the 4 empty seats in front of me. She knows exactly why they are empty. As Dr. Thorne clears her throat and begins her keynote speech, the reality of my present moment starts to slip away. The sound of her voice fades into the background, and my mind violently pulls me backward in time. I am pulled away from the bright lights of Chicago and dragged back to the rainy, overcast streets of Seattle, where the roots of this toxic nightmare first began to grow. I close my eyes, and suddenly, I am a little girl again, living in a house where I was completely invisible. Growing up in Seattle, I quickly learned that our house was a stage, and I was never meant to be the main character. The spotlight permanently belonged to my younger sister, Peyton. From the very moment she was born, she was the golden child, the center of our parents' universe. Peyton was naturally loud, constantly demanding attention, and knew exactly how to manipulate every situation to her advantage. If she scraped her knee, it was treated like a national emergency. If I broke my arm, I was told to stop making such a big fuss and wait quietly in the car. It was a bizarre, deeply toxic dynamic. Peyton was aggressively mediocre at absolutely everything she tried. She struggled to maintain a C average in middle school and high school. She dropped out of every extracurricular activity she joined within 2 weeks. But my parents, Richard and Sylvia, treated her as if she were a fragile, misunderstood genius who just needed more support. I, on the other hand, was the shadow child. I was quiet, deeply introverted, and fiercely independent because I had to be. Nobody was going to pack my lunch or check my homework, so I did it myself. I poured all of my lonely energy into academics. I thought that if I could just be perfect, if I could just bring home report cards filled with straight A grades, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Peyton. But my achievements were always brushed aside as if they were simply expected, and therefore, entirely unimpressive. I vividly remember the night I brought home my final high school transcript. I had graduated at the absolute top of my class, securing the position of valedictorian. I placed the paper on the kitchen counter while my mother was making dinner. She barely glanced at it. She just sighed and said, "Well, grades have always been easy for you, Blair. You do not have to try. Peyton actually has to work hard just to memorize her cheerleading routines, so she needs our encouragement more." That was the running narrative. My success was a genetic accident, while Peyton's failures were evidence of her struggles that required endless financial and emotional coddling. The ultimate slap in the face happened on the actual day of my high school graduation. I was scheduled to give the valedictorian speech at the end of the ceremony. Halfway through the event, Peyton complained that the gymnasium was too hot and that she had a slight headache. Instead of telling a healthy 17-year-old girl to drink some water and sit still, my parents packed up their things and left. They walked right out the back doors of the gym. I stood behind the curtain, waiting for my name to be called, watching my family's empty folding chairs. I delivered my speech to a crowd of strangers. I walked home alone that day, clutching my diploma, crying silently in the Seattle rain. I promised myself that day that I would leave and never look back. Leaving Seattle and going away to college was supposed to be my grand escape. I enrolled in a grueling pre-med program, completely determined to build a life so successful that my parents could not possibly ignore me. But the escape was only physical. The emotional manipulation followed me across the country like a dark cloud. My 4 years of undergraduate studies were an absolute blur of exhaustion. I was working 3 different part-time jobs just to afford my cramped off-campus apartment and my textbooks, while maintaining a perfect grade point average. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, living off cheap ramen noodles and instant coffee. During all of this, my parents contributed exactly $0 to my education. They claimed they were teaching me the value of a hard-earned dollar. Meanwhile, Peyton was failing out of a local community college while driving a brand new car they bought for her birthday. But the worst part of college was not the poverty or the sleep deprivation. It was the phone calls from Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice was my father's sister, and she functioned as the official flying monkey of the family. She was the one they deployed to make me feel guilty. At least twice a month, my cheap prepaid cell phone would ring, and it would be Beatrice. She never asked how my exams went. She never asked if I had enough money for groceries. She would launch right into a guilt trip. She would say things like, "Your mother is so depressed that you never visit, Blair. You are being incredibly selfish hiding out in your dorm room while your family misses you. Peyton is so stressed out lately, and you are not even there to be a good big sister." I would sit on the floor of my tiny apartment, surrounded by organic chemistry notes, biting my lip so hard it bled just to keep from screaming. I was working 80 hours a week trying to survive, and they painted me as the villain for not flying home to comfort my sister over a bad breakup. I absorbed all of their toxicity because I still harbored this pathetic, lingering hope. I told myself, just wait until I get into medical school. Medical school is the ultimate prize. It is prestigious. It is undeniable. When I finally get that acceptance letter, Richard and Sylvia will have to brag about me. They will have to respect me. I convinced myself that becoming a doctor was the magical key that would finally unlock my parents' love. I was so incredibly naive. The illusion of family completely shattered when I was 22 years old. It was the spring of my senior year of college, and I had just achieved the impossible. I received an acceptance letter from a top-tier, highly competitive medical school in Chicago. Only 3% of applicants were accepted, and I was one of them. I was shaking with joy when I bought a cheap plane ticket to fly back to Seattle for the weekend. I wanted to tell them the news in person. I walked into the living room, handed the thick envelope to my father, Richard, and waited for the proud smile. Instead, he put his reading glasses on, scanned the letter, and frowned. He did not say congratulations. He asked how much it cost. I explained that I had secured partial scholarships, but I needed him to co-sign on my federal student loans to cover the rest of the tuition. I promised I would pay every single cent back once I became an attending physician. I just needed his signature as a guarantor. Richard placed the letter on the coffee table, crossed his arms, and shook his head. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Absolutely not. Medical school is a massive gamble, Blair. Most people drop out or fail. Your mother and I simply cannot risk our retirement fund by attaching our names to hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You need to learn true financial independence. If you really want to be a doctor, you will figure out how to pay for it yourself." I was stunned. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I tried to argue, pleading that this was my entire future, but Sylvia chimed in, telling me to stop acting so entitled to their money. I left the living room feeling completely defeated. But the ultimate betrayal did not hit me until 2 days later. I was looking for a pen in my father's home office desk when I stumbled across a fresh stack of banking documents. They were not hidden. They were sitting right there in plain sight. I picked up the papers and my heart dropped into my stomach. It was a finalized loan agreement and a vehicle purchase contract. Just 3 weeks prior, Richard and Sylvia had dropped $50,000 in cash. They bought Peyton a luxury sports utility vehicle because her old car was quote-unquote lacking modern safety features. On top of that, they had wired another huge sum of money to fund Peyton's new online fashion boutique, which was really just her buying cheap, terribly made clothes from overseas and trying to resell them at a markup. They refused to sign a piece of paper to guarantee my medical education, claiming poverty and risk, but they practically set $50,000 on fire to fund my sister's delusions. Something inside me snapped. The pathetic, hopeful little girl inside me died right then and there. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I walked into my childhood bedroom, packed a single duffel bag with my clothes, and called a taxi. I left the house in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. That was the exact moment I officially cut the emotional cord. I realized that my family was a disease, and the only cure was total amputation. If you are enjoying this story of toxic family dynamics and ultimate karma, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the ProRevenge channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are currently living in. Every single comment helps the video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it. After that final, freezing night in Seattle, I landed in Chicago with nothing but a duffel bag and a mountain of spite. Since I had no cosigner for my medical school loans yet, I had to defer my enrollment for 2 full years. I needed to prove to the banks that I was a high-earning, independent adult. I took an intensive course to become a certified emergency medical technician, or an EMT. I spent the next 24 months working the graveyard shift on an ambulance in the roughest parts of Chicago. It was a brutal, bone-deep type of work that most 22-year-old girls from the suburbs couldn't dream of. I traded my textbooks for a blood-stained uniform and a heavy pair of work boots. My life became a blur of sirens, flashing blue lights, and the metallic smell of blood. I worked 12-hour shifts, often back-to-back, starting at 7 in the evening and ending at 7 in the morning when the rest of the world was just waking up for coffee. The city at night is a different world, it's violent, it's cold, and it's unapologetically honest. I spent my nights performing chest compressions on sidewalk pavements, bandage-wrapping gunshot wounds, and talking down people having the worst mental health crises of their lives. I saw the absolute bottom of human existence. But as much as the job exhausted me, it also saved me. It gave me a thick skin that my parents could never pierce again. During those long, dark hours in the back of the ambulance, I met Dominic. Dominic was 10 years older than me, a veteran medic with a permanent scowl and a heart of pure gold. He became my partner and my unofficial protector. We spent thousands of hours together in that cramped, vibrating cabin. He was the first person who didn't look at me like a glorified student. He looked at me like a teammate. We would park the ambulance behind a flickering neon diner at 3 in the morning, sharing a single large cup of gas station coffee that tasted like burnt dirt. Dominic would listen to me talk about the medical school textbooks I was reading under the dim interior lights of the ambulance between calls. One night, I finally told him about the luxury SUV and the Vegas trips. Dominic didn't offer me a hug. He just spat his coffee into a plastic cup, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Blair, some people are just born into families that are basically human anchors. If you don't cut the rope, they'll drown you just for the fun of watching the bubbles." That was the most honest piece of advice I had ever received. I worked every holiday, every weekend, and every overtime shift available. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet and ate expired protein bars. By the end of those 2 years, I had saved every single cent of the $50,000 I needed to bridge the gap for my loans. I didn't need a cosigner anymore. I had my own history of blood and sweat to back me up. Working the holiday shifts as an EMT was perhaps the most isolating experience of my life. While the rest of the country was wrapping presents and sitting around decorated dinner tables, I was scraping frozen slush off the ambulance windshield and transporting elderly people who had been forgotten by their families. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the digital heat coming from my family back in Seattle. Even though I had moved away, I hadn't blocked them yet. I was still masochistic enough to check their social media. On Thanksgiving of my first year in Chicago, I was sitting in the ambulance, eating a cold turkey sandwich from a vending machine, when a notification popped up. It was a video from Peyton. She was laughing, wearing a designer sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, showing off the massive, glittering feast my mother had cooked. Richard was in the background, carving a turkey and laughing at a joke Peyton had made. They looked like a picture-perfect postcard of American happiness. Not a single person asked where I was. Not a single person sent a text saying they missed me. Later that night, my phone rang. It was Aunt Beatrice. I made the mistake of answering. Beatrice didn't even say hello. She immediately started lecturing me about how heartless I was for not flying home. She told me that Sylvia had cried for an hour because the dinner table felt incomplete. I told Beatrice that I was currently covered in someone else's vomit and working a 20-hour shift because I had to pay for my own life. Beatrice scoffed and said, "Oh, Blair, always the martyr. You chose that dirty job just to make your parents look bad. You could have stayed home and worked at a nice boutique like Peyton." I hung up on her mid-sentence. That was the moment I realized that in their narrative, I would always be the villain. If I succeeded, I was arrogant. If I struggled, I was doing it for attention. If I stayed away, I was cold. There was no winning. I began to treat their voices like background noise, like the static on a radio that you just learned to ignore. I spent my Christmas that year in the emergency room, helping a surgeon repair a shattered leg from a car accident. As I watched the surgeon work with such precision and calm, I felt a spark of something new. It wasn't just ambition anymore. It was a realization that I belonged in that sterile, high-stakes environment far more than I ever belonged in that house in Seattle. I started to see my life as a series of surgical procedures. I was cutting away the necrotic tissue of my past. It was painful, yes, but it was necessary to prevent the infection from spreading to my future. I stopped checking Peyton's Instagram. I stopped waiting for the "I'm sorry" text that was never going to come. I became a ghost to them, and for the first time in 24 years, I felt like I was finally starting to breathe. The breaking point came during a freak blizzard in February of my second year as an EMT. The city was paralyzed under 3 feet of snow, and the temperature had dropped to -15 degrees. We had been running calls for 18 hours straight. My feet were numb, my back was screaming in pain, and my brain felt like it was vibrating from sheer exhaustion. We responded to a call in a derelict apartment building where an elderly man had collapsed. He had no heat, no food, and no family. As we loaded him into the back of the ambulance, he gripped my hand with a terrifying strength and whispered, "Don't let them forget I was here." Those 6 words shattered me. I realized that if I died that night in the snow, my family wouldn't even know for weeks. They would probably find out through a letter from the bank about my unpaid bills. I sat in the back of that ambulance, watching the old man's heart rate monitor, and I just started to cry. I didn't sob, the tears just leaked out of my eyes and froze on my cheeks. I felt like I was disappearing. I felt like the world was eating me alive and there was no one left to pull me back. Dominic saw me. He didn't say anything at first. He just climbed into the back, handed me his heavy wool coat, and sat on the bench across from me. He waited until the old man was stable at the hospital, and then he took me to a 24-hour diner that was still miraculously open. He bought me a plate of greasy bacon and eggs and watched me eat in silence. "You're done, Blair," he said quietly. I looked up, confused. He pointed at the stack of medical school brochures I kept in my bag. "You've got the money. You've got the grit. You've seen enough blood to last a lifetime. Go be a doctor. If you stay in this ambulance any longer, the bitterness is going to turn your heart into a stone, and you're too good of a medic for that." He was right. I applied for my independent loans the next day. When the approval letter finally arrived, I didn't call my parents. I didn't even call Aunt Beatrice. I took Dominic out for a steak dinner, thanked him for keeping me sane, and prepared to move into the next phase of my war. I walked into the first day of medical school at age 24 with a level of focus that terrified my classmates. While they were complaining about the long hours of lectures and the smell of the cadaver lab, I was thinking about the nights I spent in the Chicago snow. I knew I could handle anything they threw at me. I was a survivor, and I was finally ready to become a legend. The first 2 years of medical school are often described as a drinking from a fire hose experience. For me, it was more like a slow, deliberate march through a desert. I was 24, older than most of my peers who had come straight from their wealthy parents' homes with brand new laptops and zero life experience. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a home to go back to if I failed a board exam. Every single test was a high-stakes gamble with my entire existence. To keep my head above water, I took a job working the graveyard shift at the medical library. I would study anatomy and biochemistry from midnight until 6 in the morning, surrounded by the smell of old paper and the hum of industrial heaters. I was living on 4 hours of sleep and a diet of protein shakes and sheer willpower. During this time, my family back in Seattle became like a distant, annoying radio station that I could only hear in snatches. Every few months, my mother would send a text, but never to ask how I was doing. It was always a request for free labor. Sylvia would send me photos of a rash on her arm or ask me to explain Peyton's blood test results because they didn't want to pay a copay at their local clinic. I remember one specific text from my father, Richard. He sent me a photo of a new boat he had bought for their lake house. He wrote, "Since you're learning all that medical stuff, you should come home this summer and help us winterize the boat. We could use the extra hands." There was no mention of my tuition. No mention of the fact that I was working 40 hours a week on top of my studies. He viewed my medical education as a convenient tool for his own comfort, rather than a monumental achievement I was starving for. I didn't reply to any of it. I realized that to them, I wasn't a person, I was a utility. I was the smart one who was supposed to be there to fix their problems, while Peyton was the special one who was supposed to be pampered. I leaned into my isolation. I became the student who was always in the lab, always in the library, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. I was building a wall of expertise around myself, a fortress made of knowledge that no one could ever take away from me. By the time I reached my clinical rotations in the 3rd year, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was a machine. I had the clinical instincts of an EMT and the academic rigor of a valedictorian. I was ready for the hospital wards, but I wasn't ready for the person I was about to meet there. 3rd-year clinical rotations are where medical students are finally thrown into the deep end of the hospital. It's where you find out if you actually have what it takes to be a healer. I chose surgery for my first rotation, which most people considered a suicide mission. The department was run by Dr. Margaret Thorne. She was a legend in the surgical world, a tiny, formidable woman with silver hair and eyes that could cut through bone. She was notorious for being the student killer. She had zero patience for incompetence, and she was known to make students cry in the middle of the operating room if they couldn't answer a question about obscure vascular anatomy. Most of my classmates were terrified of her. They would shake when she entered the room. But I wasn't scared. After 2 years of dealing with violent drunks and cardiac arrests in the back of a moving ambulance, a stern surgeon didn't intimidate me. During our first week, we were standing around a patient during morning rounds. Dr. Thorne fired a series of rapid-fire questions at a student from a wealthy Ivy League background. He stuttered, turned bright red, and eventually looked at his shoes. Dr. Thorne sighed, a sound that felt like a death sentence, and turned to me. "You. The one with the cheap watch and the tired eyes. What's the primary concern for a patient with this specific metabolic profile?" I answered her instantly. I didn't just give the textbook answer, I gave the clinical application I had seen in the field. She paused, her eyebrows shooting up toward her hairline. She didn't say good job. She just said, scrub in on my 10 o'clock cholecystectomy. Don't be late. Over the next few months, Dr. Thorne became my shadow. She pushed me harder than any other student. She would call me at 4 in the morning to assist on emergency surgeries. She would grill me for hours on surgical techniques. One day, after a particularly grueling 12-hour surgery where I had held a retractor for 6 hours without moving, we were washing our hands at the scrub sink. She looked at me through the glass and said, "You have the hands of a surgeon, Blair, but you have the eyes of someone who has already been to war. Where did you come from?" It was the first time anyone in that ivory tower had actually seen me. I didn't tell her everything then, but I told her I used to be an EMT in the South Side. She nodded slowly, her expression softening just a fraction. "Most of these kids are playing doctor," she whispered. "You're fighting for it. Keep fighting." From that day on, she wasn't just my teacher, she was my mentor. She started taking me under her wing, inviting me to research meetings and treating me like a junior colleague rather than a nuisance. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found a parent who actually valued my worth. It was Christmas Eve of my final year of medical school. The hospital was quiet, covered in a thick blanket of Chicago snow. Most of the other students had gone home to their families, but I had volunteered for the double shift. I had nowhere else to go, and I needed the extra credit for my residency applications. I was sitting in the back of the surgical break room, staring at a lukewarm cup of coffee and a small, sad plastic Christmas tree on the table. The door opened, and Dr. Thorne walked in. She looked exhausted, her surgical cap still hanging around her neck. She sat down across from me and sighed. "Why are you here, Blair? Even I'm going home in an hour." I looked at her, and for some reason, the exhaustion and the holiday loneliness finally broke through my defenses. I told her everything. I told her about the $50,000 luxury SUV my parents bought for Peyton while they refused to co-sign my loans. I told her about the glorified student comments and the years of being an invisible ghost in my own home. I told her that my family was currently planning a massive, week-long celebration in Las Vegas for Peyton's social media milestone, and they had already told me they wouldn't be coming to my graduation in May. I didn't cry while I told the story. I told it with the cold, clinical detachment of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. When I finished, the room was silent for a long time. Dr. Thorne didn't reach across the table to pat my hand. She didn't tell me that family is everything or that I should try to forgive him. Instead, she stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. "My father was a drunk who told me I'd never be more than a waitress," she said, her voice low and sharp. "I haven't spoken to him in 30 years. Blood is an accident of biology, Blair. Loyalty is a choice. Your parents are making their choice. They are choosing a sparkling pool in Vegas over the birth of a doctor." She turned back to me, her eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire. "You are going to be a brilliant surgeon. And when you stand on that stage in May, you will not be alone. I am the keynote speaker for your graduation ceremony." I was going to give a generic speech about the future of medicine. But I think I've just found a much better topic. She gave me a small, wicked smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Go get some sleep, doctor. You have a long road ahead of you, and I intend to make sure the right people are watching when you finally cross the finish line." I walked back to my apartment that night through the snow, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a weapon that was finally being unsheathed. The memory of that Christmas Eve in the break room flashes through my mind and then dissolves, snapping me back to the present. The humid air of the Chicago Stadium is thick with the scent of expensive perfume and floral arrangements. I am sitting in my velvet robes, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Dr. Margaret Thorne is standing at the mahogany podium, the bright stage lights reflecting off her glasses. She looks out at the sea of 10,000 people, her expression unreadable. She adjusts the microphone, and a high-pitched squeak of feedback rings through the auditorium, causing everyone to wince. Then, she begins to speak. Her voice is calm, professional, and deceptively soft. She starts by talking about the hidden costs of a medical education. She talks about the debt, the stress, and the sleepless nights. But then, her tone shifts. It becomes harder, colder. We often hear that it takes a village to raise a doctor, she says, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. We celebrate the parents and the spouses who supported these graduates. But today, I want to talk about a different kind of student. I want to talk about a student who didn't have a village. I want to talk about a young woman who was told she was nothing more than a glorified student by her own mother. A murmur ripples through the crowd. I feel my heart hammering against my ribs. Dr. Thorne continues, her gaze fixed on the empty VIP seats in the front row. While this student was working 12-hour shifts on an ambulance, cleaning up blood and saving lives to pay for her own tuition, her parents were buying luxury cars and funding boutiques for her sister. And today, as this brilliant woman becomes a doctor, her parents are sitting in a cabana in Las Vegas, drinking margaritas and celebrating a social media follower count. The stadium goes deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop. Then, Dr. Thorne leans into the microphone, her voice dripping with a terrifying, righteous fury. I would like to personally congratulate Richard and Sylvia for their absence. You have failed as parents, but in doing so, you have created a surgeon who is stronger than you will ever understand. Blair, stand up. I stand up, my legs shaking. 10,000 people turn to look at me. The silence lasts for 3 heartbeats, and then, a roar of applause erupts from the student section. It spreads like wildfire through the stadium. Dr. Thorne smiles at me, a sharp, triumphant look. I look down at those 4 empty, plush red seats. They don't look like a void anymore. They look like a victory. The moment the ceremony ends, the world explodes. I haven't even made it out of the stadium before my phone begins to vibrate so violently I think the battery might burst. I find a quiet corner behind a concrete pillar and pull the device out. It is absolute chaos. The graduation was being live-streamed on the university's website, and apparently, someone had already clipped Dr. Thorne's speech and posted it to TikTok and Twitter. It is going viral in real time. I have 42 missed calls from Aunt Beatrice. My inbox is flooded with messages from cousins I haven't spoken to in years, all of them shocked and horrified by the public humiliation of my parents. I open my mother's contact. Sylvia has sent a string of increasingly hysterical texts. One says, "How could you let her say those things? We are being harassed online." Peyton is crying because people are calling her a spoiled brat on her own page. Fix this right now. I look at the screen and feel nothing. No guilt. No anger. Just a profound sense of closure. I go to Peyton's Instagram page. It's a disaster zone. Thousands of people have flooded her latest Vegas photo with comments like, "Must be nice to have a luxury car while your sister wipes up blood," and "Your sister is a doctor and you're just a parasite." Her follower count is dropping by the second. My father, Richard, leaves a voicemail. His voice is shaking with a mix of rage and panic. He says, "Blair, my business partners saw that video. They're asking me questions I can't answer. You have destroyed my reputation. I expect a public apology by tomorrow morning." I listen to the entire message, then I do something I should have done years ago. I select their contacts, one by one. Richard. Sylvia. Peyton. Aunt Beatrice. I hit the block button on all of them. Then, I delete my social media apps. I am no longer a part of their theater. I walk out of the stadium and see Dominic standing by the gates, wearing a suit that looks 2 sizes too small for him. He's holding a massive bouquet of red roses and grinning like a maniac. Dr. Thorne is standing next to him. "Ready to go to work, doctor?" she asks. I take a deep breath of the fresh Chicago air. The glorified student is dead. The doctor is finally home. My Aunt Beatrice and the rest of my extended family are blowing up my phone through mutual friends, begging me to issue a public statement to clear my parents' names, saying Dr. Thorne's speech went too far and destroyed my father's business reputation and my sister's influencer career. So, tell me, am I wrong for refusing to clear their names and letting them face the consequences of their own choices? Thank you so much for watching. If you loved seeing toxic family dynamics exposed and absolute karma delivered, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. We bring you the most satisfying ProRevenge and drama stories every single week. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts, I read every single one. See you in the next video.